Hey everybody, can everyone hear okay? Hopefully, we had some small technical issues before we got started, but I think we're okay. Thank you. This is the last week of our class. I hope you're enjoying it so far. I hope this is a fitting conclusion. Just a couple of announcements again, really quickly. If you want me to answer any questions, even though we're not meeting next week, I'm happy to answer them over email. You can ask them during the presentation by emailing lifelonglearning@wichita.edu. But don't ask them on live chat on YouTube because nobody is monitoring it. And feel free to send me questions at my email address, francis.connor@wichita.edu. I'm slightly behind on answering emails, but if you sent me something, I swear I'll get to it very soon. If you want to ask questions in the room, there is a mic set up for comments, questions, etc. Stand up to the X marked on the floor. Do not touch the mic and ask your question into it. I'll take a break at about 10 minutes before the hour, and I'll try to leave at least 10 minutes or so at the end of the session for anyone else with questions. So, a topic for my last week. Instead of focusing on one play, I'm going to throw two seemingly different plays together, As You Like It and Time in Athens. As we talked with Coriolanus last week, the climactic speech in Coriolanus, I think, is when he is banished and he has that speech that ends, there is a world elsewhere. He is banished, so he's going to go off someplace else to create a new world for himself, although in his case that turns out to be badly. He finds his political and personal lives in conflict, and exile is the way that he handles that. So if there's something that connects the two plays we're looking at today, it is that notion of exile, because both of these plays deal with people who need to leave the city, go elsewhere, and they end very differently. Neither of these are as explicitly political as Coriolanus, but they both deal with what we might call larger social issues. As You Like It is very much about the relationship between humanity and nature, and Time in Athens is very much about the relationship between culture and money, we'll say. So we'll go on. Next slide, please. Yes. So to start with As You Like It, and this is another one of those, we've been talking about mini genres in all of the works we've covered this week. Ovidian poetry, Ovidian erotic poetry in Venus and Adonis, revenge tragedy in Titus Andronicus, classical tragedy in Coriolanus. And As You Like It draws very much from the genre of pastoral. And pastoral is a classically derived genre. Hesiod's Works and Days in Greeks, Virgil's Eclogues in Latin. It's a genre Shakespeare would have been familiar with. And in the early modern period, okay, am I back? Okay, I apologize. Of course, for the last week of class, the internet is deciding to be fickle. I apologize. Yes, pastoral, classical genre, one Shakespeare would have been very familiar with through works like Virgil's Eclogues, one that informs a lot of Shakespeare's plays. Midsummer Night's Dream might be an obvious one, where the lovers spend the night in the forest and have all kinds of wacky adventures. Mary Wise of Windsor is another one. And I want to talk about it in the context of his comedy, As You Like It. Next slide, please. So here's an artifact. This is a book that you may find in the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. And it's actually an account book. Most of this is, and it's in a lovely leather case. If you ever wanted to see what a late 16th century leather briefcase looked like, this is in one of those. And most of it are some sort of accounting, a lot of numbers and figures and adding and stuff like that. But in the back of this, the poem you're seeing here. And the poem is a lyric you might be familiar with, and I actually have a version of it as the top on if you were given the handout on that. It's a poem you might know as "The Passionate Shepherd to His Love." Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove, etc. A poem that was often coupled with the nymph's reply to the shepherd. The version of this is included in this book, the "Come Live with Me and Be My Love," and the conclusion. It's written very neatly in this, which shows that whoever owned this book took great care in copying it in there. And it's a unique version of these poems. The "Come Live with Me" is in 7 stanzas, and there aren't any other 7 stanza versions of "The Passionate Shepherd to His Love." So this shows that even though this is very much a quintessential pastoral poem in which the shepherd tries to convince the woman to love him, that they'll live in the woods and be happy forever, and the woman kind of disdains him. So it's a very classical pastoral lyric. The fact that it shows up in this account book, right, a book that's otherwise just boring figures and whatnot, and if you're an accountant, I'm not mocking your profession, I apologize. It shows how popular this poem was, and it certainly is popular. It's in dozens of manuscripts and printed books. And it shows how important pastoral is, because again, this is the quintessential pastoral text, so this is great evidence of its popularity. Now, traditionally, the "Passionate Shepherd to His Love" has been attributed to Christopher Marlowe. The nymph's reply to the shepherd has been attributed to Sir Walter Raleigh. But both of those attributions are probably incorrect. And in fact, if we go to the next slide, this is an image from a book published in 1599 called "The Passionate Pilgrim," and it's attributed to William Shakespeare. It's a collection of poems. And indeed, some of the poems in that book were certainly written by Shakespeare, but not all of them. It seems to have been a publisher named William Jaggard who wanted to publish a book of Shakespeare and Shakespeare-ish poems that were inspired by Shakespeare's lyrics or looked like they could have been Shakespeare. And included in this is a version of that poem in manuscript, the "Come live with me and be my love, we will all the pleasures prove that hills and valleys, dales and fields, and all the craggy mountains yield." So in this book associated with Shakespeare, this is the first print version of the "Passionate Shepherd to His Love." Now, it's unlikely that Shakespeare wrote this, although it's probably included in here because a snippet of this poem appears in Merry Wives of Windsor. So it seems to have been just like the popular song nowadays might appear in a lot of movies. A popular poem might appear in plays, and that seemed to be the case with this lyric, and this is why it appears in "Passionate Pilgrim" as something Shakespeare may have written. But again, it shows Shakespeare's proximity to the pastoral genre. So this lyric, in summary, it's the most popular lyric in 17th century England. It's light, it's escapist, it's natural. But it's worth keeping in mind that the people reading this aren't actually pining to go and live in the woods. They're in London. This book is printed in London. That manuscript is of a businessman writing in London. So there is kind of a fiction to pastoral writing, as popular as it is. The next slide. And this is an image from a work that really, at least for Shakespeare's time, made pastoral a popular genre. It's a work called The Shepherd's Calendar. And it's literally a calendar, 12 months of the year. Each month offering a poem based on the seasons, with different sorts of characters talking about, the winter in January or the summer in July and things like that. So each of the poems is illustrated by a woodcut, and here is the woodcut from the poem January in the Shepherd's Calendar. And the shepherd in the middle is a gentleman named Colin Clout, and he is a poet. And the plot of the poem is that he's fallen for a country lass named Rosalind. I'm sorry, she's fallen for a city lass named Rosalind. No, I'm sorry. I was right the first time. A country lass named Rosalind. And Colin writes a poem for Rosalind, but Rosalind rejects it as, quote, rude, because she prefers the more polished entertainment of court poetry. And Colin, the simple shepherd, breaks his pipe, and he vows he's never going to make poetry again because Rosalind has rejected him. And this woodcut visually depicts this contrast between court and country, right? On the left is a picture of the city represented by, you see the buildings and whatnot, and that's the sophisticated urban ideal that Rosalind aspires to. And on the other side is the cottage. You see the sheep that Colin is watching there. That is the countryside. And this is one of the fundamental conflicts in pastoral, a contrast between an idealized countryside with simple people like Colin and a corrupt city who influences people like Rosalind to disdain the simple country life. This is the tradition that Shakespeare's working from in As You Like It and other plays. And so what we want to think about in a play like As You Like It is how Shakespeare sets up this dichotomy between country and city and what he hopes to do with it. Next slide, please. And this is just our kind of, the formatting went wonky again. Just a lit-crit definition of pastoral, a fictionalized imitation of rural life, usually the life of an imaginary golden age in which the love of shepherds and shepherdesses play a prominent part. Now, Shakespeare doesn't often use shepherds and shepherdesses in his plays, but in his plays, the forest or the natural world is often idealized and is often imagined as a space where problems or vices associated with the city can be corrected, where people can possibly learn and change and weird and mysterious things happen. Next couple of slides, please. And these are just more in context, those pictures from the Shepherd's Calendar of Spenser. The poem January very much complains about the winter. Next slide, please. Or I'm sorry, February complains about the winter. The next slide is January. Next slide, please. This just gives a little quote that illustrates how pastoral is operating. The conflict between city and country is working in the Shepherd's Calendar. As Colin Clout complains, she deigns not my goodwill, but doth reprove, and of my rural music holdeth scorn, right? She hates her simple country music. Shepherds devise she hateth as the snake, and last the songs that Colin Clout doth make. So Rosalind is too good for the country, and the songs sung in the country, because she aspires to be a city girl. And this is the problem in Colin Clout, that the simple pleasures of the country are threatened by the corruption of the city. So next slide, please, for a more taxonomic comparison of pastoral. Pastoral is often seen as a response to epic poetry. And here, just listing some of the contrast between styles, right? Epic is often, or dramatic tragedies are often written in a formal, elevated style, whereas pastoral often aspires to common speech. Shakespeare's pastoral-ish plays, like As You Like It, tend to have more prose in them than a lot of his histories or tragedies, for example. Epics are often set in great cities or around the world or across the seas, right? Think of something like the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Aeneid. Whereas pastoral, usually set in a forest, usually set on a small plot of rural land. Epics are about quests, right? Odysseus trying to get back home, Aeneas finding Rome, etc. Whereas pastoral, there aren't often, the conflicts are things like, this farm girl doesn't like my poetry, oh, what am I going to do, right? Simple problems. Epics often tell the story of the founding of a nation. Pastorals are often about the escapes of the politics within a nation. And epic was often seen as the genre that a poet should aspire to write. Ideally, the career was that a poet would begin by writing simple pastoral poems that they would work up to epics. Virgil is the model for that. He wrote his eclogues and other pastoral poems before he wrote the Aeneid. Most famously in English, John Milton, Lycidas, his pastoral poem to his dead classmate. That poem ends with his declaration that he's going to write an epic, and lo and behold, almost 30 years later, he writes Paradise Lost. So epics are seen as the culmination of a poetic career, whereas pastoral is a starter's genre, much simpler. So carry on, please. Next slide. So As You Like It, some facts about this play. It was probably written and performed around the turn of the century, around 1600. There's some evidence that it may have been performed at court. There's a poem that might have been a epilogue to a court performance. But other than that, we don't have a lot of evidence of it being performed, although again, since we don't have a performance record, this doesn't necessarily reveal anything. It's only published posthumously in 1623 in the first folio of Shakespeare. It seems like it was essentially put up for, it was made available to publishers to publish around 1600, but nobody did so. So it was not published in Shakespeare's lifetime and only afterwards. A lot of the plot comes from a popular romance, a prose romance by Thomas Lodge, who's also a playwright, called Rosalind. The main plot of Rosalind dressing as a boy in the forest seems to come from him. Although some of the characters, most notably the clown, are Shakespeare's additions to this. So again, even in Shakespeare's time, there is some profit to be made in adapting popular works in one genre to another genre, right? Making movies out of the book. In case this is a good one for your next Shakespeare trivia contest, Rosalind has the largest female part in Shakespeare, according to the number of words spoken. So it's a major role for an actress to play. One of the defining features of As You Like It is that there are an awful lot of songs in it. And as I'll talk about in 1 minute, there isn't a whole lot of plot to As You Like It. And it is almost like a musical where once you get into the forest, especially, it seems to stop every so often to sing songs. It's been thought that the play may have been written with a couple, the Lord Chamberlain's men may have had a couple of good young singers at the time that this play was supposed to showcase. And again, the bulk of this play after the first act is set in the forest of Arden or Ardennes. We'll talk about that. So it very much draws on this pastoral tradition. And so as we approach this, we might want to ask why? What is it doing with the pastoral genre? Next slide, please. Place again. Oh no, there it is. Okay, so as the question, why is this a pastoral? This speech, spoken by Duke Senior, is probably the most explicit conventional pastoral statement in the play. I'll describe the plot in a second, but Duke Senior essentially has been banished with his men to live in the forest. And here he's describing its virtues. So he says, now my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp, right? Hasn't living the old ways in the forest been more sweet than the life of painted pomp, of fake glory that is associated with the city? Painted pomp, fake pomp. Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court, right? The court being part of the city, being associated with envy and ambition, which they are free of in the woods. So the peril of ambition is associated with the city, not in the forest here. Here feel we not the penalty of Adam, the penalty of Adam probably being work, right? When Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, one of the punishments is that they actually had to do real labor to sustain themselves. But in the forest, they're back to this sort of natural state where labor is a joy. They don't suffer that penalty of Adam. The seasons difference, they don't feel differences between seasons. As the icy fang and churlish chiding of the winter's wind, which, when it bites and blows upon my body, even till I shrink with cold, I smile and say, this is no flattery. These are counselors that feelingly persuade me what I am. Even when it's cold out, he's suggesting, and it's bitter. It doesn't matter because he is learning something. They persuade me what I am. So in the forest, we don't really work. We don't feel the differences in seasons because we're learning from nature. Sweet, he says, are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel on its head. Being cold is a kind of adversity, and they are learning from adversity in the forest. So when they feel pain, it's not really pain, it's a learning experience. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. So nature is going to be their teacher. It is going to be their books, their sermons. It's going to be what they learn from. And so rather than lament the pomp, the material comforts of the city, they'll become much more experienced, much smarter, much kinder in the forest. And this is Duke Senior's claim about his circumstance. Now, there is the question we might want to talk about in this play is how seriously we're supposed to take Duke Senior's speech. And in fact, some of his counselors kind of react as, yeah, I guess. But nevertheless, he is a sympathetic center to this play. And this identifies this as a play that's going to be working with the pastoral mode, the country contrasted to the city. Next slide, please. Let's unpack. We'll go with the good tickle brain a little early to unpack the plot a little bit, so I can focus on a couple of characters. But as the comic suggests, it's a really simple play. It's a really simple comedy. Rosalind disguises as a boy, goes in the forest. Orlando follows her there. Meets her as Ganymede in the forest, doesn't realize it's Rosalind. He practices love with her, and in the end, everyone gets married. So, not like Coriolanus or Hamlet with all their twists and turns and complexities and things like that. But the core characters here, right? Orlando is the core male character. We find him at the beginning of the play arguing with his brother Oliver, who is not providing him with the sustenance he was promised upon the death of their father. Oliver sets him up to have him hurt and killed by a wrestler, Orlando finds out about this and takes his guardian at him, and they leave for the forest. Rosalind, the main female role, her father is Duke Senior, Duke Ferdinand, who has been banished to the forest. At the wrestling match, she sees Orlando and falls for him. And when she hears that he has gone to the forest, she decides to follow him in men's clothing. Celia, too, is the daughter of Duke Frederick, who banished Rosalind's father, but she and Rosalind are very close friends, and they go together in the forest. Rosalind dresses up as a boy named Ganymede. Celia dresses up as Aliens, a boy as well. So next slide, please. And a couple of the side characters, Rosalind and Celia take with them, they have a clown who just seems to be around their household to make fun of. He goes in the forest and takes the name Touchstone. He's a side plot in this play, but eventually he becomes, for a while, a voice of the city life in the country, but he ends up learning to like the country life. Duke Senior, who we've met in that speech, he lives in exile in the forest. And just to clarify the setting of this too, the forest in Shakespeare's text is called the Forest of Arden, Arden. And that is a forest in England, and it's one that would have been close to where Shakespeare lived. So in a lot of editions, you'll see this called the Forest of Arden, because it must be what Shakespeare was referring to. Now, the problem is that a lot of the other characters and some of the other settings in the play seem French. There's not really an indication that the play is set in England. So the forest they might be actually in is the Ardennes in France. And I think Shakespeare is being playful with the pun. I think it's supposed to be either or both. It goes with the sometimes fantastic ways he sees the natural world as a place where magic kind of happens, that it's in a weird way both places. And of course the stage is a fiction anyway, so the audience has some say in where they manage the setting of that. So I'll call it Arden for convenience. So Duke Senior is living in the forest. Jacques is a melancholy assistant to Duke Senior, who feels things very emotionally. And there are a lot of other, a variety of rural people, clowns and whatnot that they meet in the city where they have in the country where they have a lot of wacky adventures. So the next slide, please. I just want to give a brief illustration of how some of these characters transition from court to city, so we can maybe get a handle on what sorts of claims the play is trying to meet. So Orlando, when we meet him in the first act of the play, he's kind of a brat, and he has a legitimate complaint. His brother is keeping his education and his birthright from him. And the beginning of the play, he demands this from his brother Oliver, and in fact gets in a physical altercation with him, which is pictured in the frame here. But his speech gives some indication that his reason for wanting his birthrights are kind of, well, they're very rooted in the pastoral imaginings of the city as a place of pomp and pride and whatnot. He says in the quote I have here, where he's speaking to his brother, "You shall hear me. My father charged you in his will to give me good education. You have trained me like a peasant, obscuring and hiding from me all gentlemanlike qualities. The spirit of my father grows strong in me, and I will no longer endure it." And we see Oliver's ambition is to be a gentleman and not a peasant. He's very much a creature of the court and the city. Even though he was wrong, he still seems vain and ambitious and kind of venial, and he wants what's coming to him, not because his father wanted it or not because he feels he's earned it in some way, but because, my God, he wants to be someone of the city and not one of those rural peasants. So this is how Orlando starts out. And as we said in the plot, Oliver schemes to have Orlando agrees to fight Charles the Wrestler. Charles the Wrestler is supposed to hurt Orlando, but Orlando beats him in the wrestling match, which is a bit of a surprise. Orlando finds out that his brother has it out for him, and he goes into hiding with his guardian, Adam. In the forest, next slide, the reality of life in the forest softens him, especially when he sees his old friend, Adam, reacting to it. Orlando kind of has to take care of Adam while they're out there. He feels sympathy for Adam as they face the elements, and this brings out some sympathy in Orlando. And in the scene that I've quoted here, Adam is very hungry. Orlando needs to get food. He actually comes across Duke Signor's men, doesn't know who they are, and intends to rob them. And he pulls out his sword and, stand and deliver. But Duke Signor essentially says, "Nah, sit down, come eat with us. You're welcome." And Orlando is very moved by this gesture and his speech. Right? Speak you so gently. Pardon me, I pray you. I thought that all things had been savage here, and therefore put I on the countenance of stern commandment. Right? I thought since this was the forest, everything was untamed and wild, and anything goes, and there was no structure. So I was just acting like I was a stern robber. Right? But wherever you are, that in this desert accessible, under the shade of melancholy boughs, and he's recognizing the material space around him, lose and neglect the creeping hours of time, similar to Duke Signor's idea of the forest as a place where time just kind of melts away. If you have ever looked on better days, if ever been where bells have knolled to church, if ever sat at any good man's feast, if ever from your eyelids wiped a tear, and know what 'tis to be pity and be pitied, let gentleness my strong enforcement be. If you've ever been in a place where you've needed pity, please recognize that and sympathize with me. He's asking for an apology in Orlando's strange way. In the which hope I blush and hide my sword. And he puts his sword away. So Orlando's starting to take stock of his natural surroundings and buying in this pastoral ideal of the forest as a place that is separate from the rigid time of the city and the ambition of the city, is starting to get with the game plan, thanks to Duke Signor. Next slide. And in fact, he gets into it so well that he actually becomes something of a poet himself. He too had fallen for Rosalind when he saw her at the wrestling match. And so as a means of trying to find her, he is writing poems and putting them on trees in the forest of Arden. At some point, Rosalind and Celia find them and read them, and they're kind of famously and hilariously bad poems. Orlando isn't a great poet, but he's trying. And this speech here is something he says as we see him at the beginning of Act 3-2, hanging them up. Hang there, my verse, in witness of my love, and thou, thrice crowned queen of night, survey with thy chaste eye from thy pale sphere above the huntress's name that my full life doth sway. So he's hoping Rosalind can find them in the forest, and that the forest can help Rosalind find them. Oh, Rosalind, these trees shall be my books, and in their barks my thoughts all character. This is sort of echoing something that Duke Signor has said, right? That the forest will be our books, the trees will be our books, the stones will be our sermons. Orlando is literally turning the trees into books by putting poems on them. That every eye which in this forest looks shall see thy virtue witnessed everywhere. He's conceit of the sonnets, right? He's going to spread her virtue through his poetry in the forest. Run, run, Orlando, carve on every tree the fair, the chaste, and inexpressive she. So Orlando is learning how to use the forest as a book, as his language, how to speak through the forest and find love in it. So again, this shows the extent to which Orlando is being educated in the forest. He's no longer, or less of that, ambitious, vain city boy who wants nothing more than to be a gentleman rather than a peasant. And now he is happy to live in the forest and read trees and write poetry and feed off the land and all of that fun stuff. And it pays off for Orlando in the ending of the play, as we'll see in a minute. So the next slide. The next couple of characters. So Rosalind and Celia, Rosalind especially. So in the city, Rosalind, she begins being melancholy, and again, with good reason, because her father has been exiled and she really doesn't know what's happening with him. And she feels oppressed by the immutability of fortune, that things are bad. And her father was banished by Celia's father, Duke Frederick. Even though at the beginning of the play, Duke Frederick is okay with Rosalind hanging around, but early in the play, he changes his mind and Rosalind isn't allowed to come out anymore, which is another one of the reasons she leaves for the forest, Celia with her. But what they try to do in this speech is, at least in the beginning of the play, if the realities of the city, if the realities of the court are going to oppress them, they can try to come up with their own community of friendship. As Celia says here, I pray thee, Rosalind, be merry. Rosalind, dear Celia, I show more mirth than I am mistress of. I'm showing more mirth than I actually have. And would you yet were merrier, unless you could teach me and to forget a banished father, you must not learn me how to remember any extraordinary pleasure. Unless you can bring my father back, I'm not really going to be happy. Celia, herein I see thou lovest me not with the full weight I love thee. If my uncle, thy banished father, had banished thy uncle, the Duke my father, and so hast been still with me, I could have taught my love to take thy father for mine. In short, this is kind of a comically confusing bit of speech, but what she's saying is that if our circumstances were flipped, you would certainly share your family with me. Just as I want to share my family with you, you would share your love with me in those circumstances, just as I am sharing it with you. Rosalind, well, I will forget the condition of my estate to rejoice in yours. I'm going to do my best to leave the fruits of this urban ambition behind, to form a little community with you. Again, that turns out not to be viable when Duke Frederick doesn't want Rosalind to see Celia anymore, and they run off to the forest to correct it. So at the beginning of the play, Rosalind feels that she is oppressed by misfortune, and there's not a lot she can do to change that. So once in the forest, though, she takes on the guise of a man, and this allows her the sort of freedom and autonomy she doesn't have in the city. And this is one of the things that can happen in the forest in Shakespeare, is that you can play with your identity, including your gender. And the next slide, please. So in the forest, right, she's dressed as Ganymede. She meets Orlando there as Ganymede. He, as Ganymede, promises to teach Orlando how to love Rosalind. So for most of the play, Orlando thinks Ganymede is not Rosalind. Whatever, I lost my thought. Sorry. But Rosalind goes from being someone who is just kind of whiny and sad in the beginning to really kind of a person of action in the forest. And this little clip, it's the climax of the play's plot, where there's a lot of confusion. Through the various plots, there's a country girl named Phoebe who loves Ganymede, not knowing Ganymede is Rosalind. There's another country boy Silvius, who loves Phoebe, even though Phoebe doesn't like him. Of course, Orlando loves Rosalind. He doesn't know Ganymede is Rosalind. So here at the end of this, these different potential relationships come to a head, and Rosalind, right before the final act, essentially says she's going to resolve everything. So she says, "Pray you, no more of this," and this is after some back and forth between all the characters. "'Tis like the howling of Irish wolves against the moon." In short, shut up. You sound like Irish wolves. To Silvius, "I will help you if I can. I'm going to help you marry Phoebe, even though Phoebe doesn't want to marry you." To Phoebe, "I would love you if I could." And she's not revealing who she is, but this is going to be her excuse, right? "Tomorrow, meet me all together," to everyone. To Phoebe, "I will marry you if ever I marry woman, and I'll be married tomorrow." So it's kind of a bit of a double meaning there. I will marry you, not Ganymede is going to marry Phoebe, but I will have you married to Silvius. If ever I marry woman, I'll be married tomorrow. And she says she's going to marry someone tomorrow. To Orlando, "I will satisfy you if ever I satisfied man, and you shall be married tomorrow. So hang tight, Orlando, and you'll be married." To Silvius, "I will content you if what pleases you contents you, and you shall be married tomorrow." To Orlando, "As you love Rosalind, meet." To Silvius, "As you love Phoebe, meet," right? You love Rosalind, great. You love Phoebe, great. And as I love no woman, I'll meet, right? I do not love another woman, so I'm okay. Fare you well. I have left you commands. Rosalind takes charge. Everyone meet me tomorrow. I'll get you all married with the people that you like. So Rosalind goes from being hopeless to being the matchmaker, the person in charge. And then the next slide, please, is just an image of a couple of versions of Rosalind from an RSC production. On the left as Rosalind, on the right as Ganymede. And just as a side, it's possible to stage this play as if Ganymede's costume is bad enough that it doesn't fool anyone but Orlando, because there are a number of people in the play who seem to recognize her as a woman, even though she's not. So the next slide. So the ending is happy, of course. This is a comedy. Rosalind reveals herself, and she marries, or in the last act, and marries Orlando. Rosalind has made Phoebe promise that if she cannot marry Ganymede, that she will marry Silvius. And so Phoebe has to marry Silvius, even though she's not really happy with that. Rosalind tricks her into that marriage relationship. Everyone gets hooked up. Touchstone marries Aubrey. Celia marries Orlando's brother Oliver, the one he had a beef with early in the play. Oliver has a change of heart about his brother when it seems for a moment that Orlando might have been killed in the forest. That moves Oliver, and he's fine. So everyone is married at the end, and it is super happy. And as the cherry on top, the one bad guy kind of left in the play is Duke Frederick, Celia's father. And there's a scene of him getting ready to enter the forest to bring his daughter back and to punish Signor and everything else. But we find out his fate in this report by Jacques Du Bois, who is the middle brother between Oliver, the eldest brother, and Orlando, the youngest brother. And he relates Duke Frederick, hearing how that every day men of great worth resorted to this forest, addressed a mighty power, which were on foot in his own conduct purposely to take his brother here and put him to the sword. Frederick had heard that the Duke and his men were living in the city, and he was going to put them to the sword, kill them. And to the skirts of this wild wood he came, where, meeting with an old religious man, after some question with him, was converted, both from his enterprise and from the world, his crown bequeathing to his banished brother, and all their lands restored to them again that were with him exiled. This to be true, I do engage my life. So Duke Frederick, as he was about to enter the woods to find and kill Duke Signor, he meets an old man in the forest, discourses with him, and decides, you know what? I'm going to give up my city life and live in the woods. He's immediately converted. He finds the country life better, and that is fine. And he will restore his lands to Duke Signor, who is first in this forest. Let us do these ends that here well begun and well begot. Let's get married here too. And then they're going to return to the city. Duke Signor gets his power back, and everyone is there. Jacques at the end, sir, by your patience, if I heard you rightly, the Duke hath put on a religious life and thrown into neglect the pompous court, right? Very much that pastoral stereotype of the city. Jacques du Bois he hath. So it's a very happy ending in that not all these wonderful people get together and get married. Duke Frederick, who caused all this strife, becomes a convert and lives in the forest. Well, he will conceivably be a better person, and Duke Signor is restored to his former position. So the next slide, please. So to cap this off, there's a way you can read As You Like It as kind of a conventional pastoral play. The main characters learn something. Right? Orlando, he becomes kinder. He learns to love somebody other than himself. He learns how to write poetry, even though it's bad poetry, but it's poetry, so fine. Rosalind learns how to take charge of her own life. She's no longer resolved to thinking that misfortune will subject her to ill anymore. She takes control, and at the end marries the guy she has a crush on. Duke Signor has proven to be a good ruler in the forest. Even people like the clown, he and Jacques have a kind of philosophical rapport with them, and order is restored at the end. Right, the good guys get back what they lost. The bad people learn the errors of their ways. Oliver and Frederick. So, in a sense, this is a play that suggests that the city is corrupt, but we can take a lesson from the country, find our better selves there, and hopefully bring them back to the city to make it better. Very much a pastoral argument. But the next slide. But as with Shakespeare, nothing's that simple, and there are bits throughout the plays that suggest that this reading might be a little too simplistic. Act 4, Scene 2 is entirely taken off with a song where they celebrate hunting a deer. And Jacques, who's pictured in the water there, recites a very sorrowful poem about the hunting of a deer. And this brings up the issue of, is Duke Signor simply living neutrally in the land, or being human, is it inevitable that they will take over the land? It's kind of, shall we say, an environmental argument that we might make about this play. Is nature inevitably corrupted by human influence? So that's left hanging in there. In Act 2, Scene 4, we meet one person of the country, Corwin, who is about to lose his house. He is a renter, and his owner wants to get rid of him. And Rosalind resolves this by buying the house. Because being a fairly well-off city person, she can do that. So you see a similar argument there as with the hunting, right? We see the economic influence of the city sort of impinging on the country. So that might be an issue in the play. And the last one, Jacques. He's even though he's in the city, in the forest, and with Duke Signors, his characteristic is being kind of sad and depressed. And there is a suggestion, perhaps, that people fundamentally don't necessarily change their character going into the city, or that going into the forest, or that the forest isn't a proper explanation for why people might change. And in fact, Jacques gives the most famous speech in this play, and one of the most famous speeches in Shakespeare, with what's called the 7 Ages of Man speech. And it's a speech that essentially imagines life as a universal, these things that all of us experience. And it's a speech that's not integral to the plot, but it might suggest that Have I lost contact again? Okay. Well, I'll okay. Can I have the next slide, please? Or about the end of this bit, anyway. So yeah, you might recognize the conceit of the speech, that all the world's a stage, all the men and women merely players, right? We're all actors. It's a theatrical metaphor Shakespeare is very fond of. It's not his idea. This is actually kind of a medieval commonplace, but I think this is an issue that runs through a lot of Shakespeare, that we're all, the world is our stage, and we're simply actors. We all have our exits and our entrances. We all live and die. His acts being 7 ages, which the bulk of this speech describes, right? At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, right? We're all born and we're helpless. Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like the snail unwillingly to school, right? We're born, we grow up a little bit, and then it's off to kindergarten or whatever else. And then the lover, sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress's eyebrow, like Orlando, right? We're young and in love and acting stupid. Then a soldier full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honor. Sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth, right? And then we grow up and get a job, such as a soldier, where we are ambitious and we seek to make a name for ourselves. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. And then the justice, and then we mature in fair round belly and good capon line, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws, wide sayings, and modern instances, right? We go from the ragged youthful action of a soldier to the more professional role of the justice. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, into old age, with spectacles on nose and pouch on side, youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank and big manly voice, turning again towards childish treble. Your voice ages and you grow physically old, and we all go into old age. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is second childishness. Just as a very old person, people need to take care of you, especially on your deathbed, just like you were as an infant. And mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. This is very typical for melancholy Jacques. Even in this, what Duke Seigneur describes as the great opportunities offered by the forest, Jacques thinks about our mortalities and how there are fundamental conditions to being human. I think that the point of this speech is that simply by being human, we take on roles, and that our physical location might influence us, right? Being in the forest might change us in some ways. Being in the city changes us some ways, but we can't say how. Ultimately, it's up to us as the actors to choose our parts, to choose who we are. And As You Like It, on one hand, suggests that maybe a change, although a change of scenery, as the ones advocated by pastoral poets, from the city to the forest might make us better. It's ultimately ourselves that are choosing to make ourselves a little better. So I think there's a fundamental both appreciation of and mistrust of pastoral in As You Like It, right? Leaving the city can be good for you, but ultimately the change is yours. As if to demonstrate this, Shakespeare a couple years later would write another play about another person who leaves the city, except he doesn't seem to change all that much for the better. And that's Timon of Athens. And we'll take a little 10-minute or so break now. And when we come back, I'll introduce very quickly Timon of Athens to you, which is Shakespeare's most underappreciated play. So give it 10 and I'll be back. Okay, thank you. I'm back. Next slide, please. So, As You Like It suggests that people can change for the good, that maybe a break from the corruption of the city can encourage people to be good. The next play I want to talk about is one that's really all about the corruption of the city. Here we are, our image again of Shakespeare's First Folio. As You Like It is only published in the First Folio, and so is Timon of Athens. And I hope you have the chance, I hope you've read or have the chance in the future to read Timon of Athens, because it's a very strange play. And I would never call it one of Shakespeare's best plays, but in some ways I think it's my favorite, just because it's so unlike him in a lot of ways. The next slide, please. And this is this image from a famous Chicago production of a couple years back, kind of grounds what I want to talk about this Timon of Athens and the business of art. So like As You Like It, Timon has a pretty simple plot, but where As You Like It is more of a musical and has a lot of songs and poetry, Timon of Athens is more philosophical. It's essentially a classical play. It's based on a lot of Roman legends and sources. And historically, it's been one of Shakespeare's least performed plays. But that changed about 12 years ago, especially after the financial crisis of 2008. Timon's unusual focus on economic issues seemed suddenly relevant. And over the past decade or so, it's actually become one of the most written about plays of Shakespeare. And I think hopefully in this presentation we'll talk about why. So the next slide, please. So one of the weird things about it is, one of the circumstances of its creation. It's probably written about 1605, in the middle of the 1610s. And it's not published during Shakespeare's lifetime, and there's no evidence that it was performed. Again, this doesn't mean a whole lot. It was only published posthumously in the First Folio. The weird thing is that it doesn't seem to have been intended to be in the First Folio. This is the section of tragedies where you see Timon of Athens listed there beginning on page 80. Initially, it seems that Troilus and Cressida was supposed to be in that spot. But Troilus and Cressida, the rights to that were owned by a bookseller who either did not want to give them up or at the last minute decided not to. So they went ahead and started printing the folio as if they weren't going to get the rights of Troilus and Cressida. And they already had space for Troilus in between Romeo and Juliet and Julius Caesar. And by space, I mean Romeo and Juliet and Caesar had already been printed. So they had to come up with a play to fill that space. And they chose Timon of Athens. And Timon of Athens' inclusion messes up the page numbers because it's a much shorter play than Troilus. So I think pages like 90 to 108 are missing in the folio. Eventually, they would get the rights to Troilus and Cressida, and it is in the First Folio, even if it doesn't appear in the table of contents. So it's one weird thing about Timon is that if not for this last minute copyright dispute, it may never have been published at all. And indeed, the people who compiled the folio, Shakespeare's actors, friends, John Hemmings and Henry Condell, they seemed to exclude some plays that were known to be Shakespearean collaborative plays. So Two Noble Kinsmen isn't in there, and Pericles isn't in there, and whatnot. So that might have been why Timon wasn't initially planned to be in there. And just one of the reasons it's another reason it may not have been published, there are critics who think that the play is incomplete, in part because the ending is kind of inconclusive. We'll talk about that a little bit. So on the whole, all these reasons are weird. It's like the runt of the Shakespearean litter even in his own time. Now, one thing, this wasn't even though it's not credited this way during Shakespeare's lifetime, and it's only with modern scholarship that we've really sorted this out, Timon of Athens is one of Shakespeare's collaborative plays. And he wrote it with a fellow playwright named Thomas Middleton. The next slide, please. And Middleton's worth spending a couple of minutes on for a couple reasons. One is that I like classes like this to introduce you not only to Shakespeare, but to some of Shakespeare's peers who often wrote works as great as Shakespeare, and I certainly think Middleton is one of them. And the other is that because Timon's themes, Timon's emphasis on economics is so different from anything Shakespeare wrote, that Middleton very much is behind the work of this play, even the sections he didn't write. So he deserves his due credit. So like Shakespeare, he's born to a comfortably middle-class family in London, a family who were bricklayers by trade. Like Shakespeare, he begins his career with a poem, except his is an erotic Ovidian poem. It's a biblical poem, The Wisdom of Solomon, a religious poem. One of the first facts we have about his life is that he won a scholarship to study at Oxford, right? Unlike Shakespeare, who never went to college, but he dropped out because he was missing classes while he was, quote, daily accompanying the players. In other words, he was hanging out with actors. So it was pretty clear that Middleton decided university was not for him and he was going to be a playwright, and he did. In the early 1610s, he's writing regularly for the Children of Paul's Company, and the Children's Company is, yes, indeed, children who staged grown-up plays of tragedies and things like that. Next slide, please. Did I miss a slide, actually? Can we go? Oh, no. Okay. I swapped these. Never mind. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. One of the slides wasn't what I was expecting. So yes, he's writing for children's. No, go back to the previous one. We're okay. It's my. I hope this isn't too bad. I think I've sent you the wrong presentation, but we'll get through it. Yes, he writes for children's of Paul's. I guess one of the reasons I also want to focus on Middleton, the critic Gary Taylor calls Middleton our other Shakespeare, because Middleton is the only author other than Shakespeare to be famous for comedies, histories, tragedies, and other genres. He's the only one to be famous as a poet. He wrote as much as Shakespeare, but he's not remembered like Shakespeare is, largely because unlike Middleton was unable to join a theater company like Shakespeare was, so there was less. There was nobody inspired to collect his works. So his works were never collected in something like the first folio. They were always kind of scattered and sometimes anonymous. And for someone who who often exhibits the genius of Shakespeare, he's been kind of forgotten, our other Shakespeare. So in the 1610s, he's famous for a lot of his tragedies, especially the Revenger's tragedy, which is very much kind of a, how can I put it? In dialogue with Hamlet. It actually opens with somebody holding a skull of his beloved, kind of like Hamlet and Yorick. For a while, he leaves the theater and becomes an employee of the City of London. He's the city chronologer, and he writes pageants for various festivals. And he comes back in the 1620s and writes a couple of tragedies that are based around lead female characters. Near the end of his career, he writes a play called A Game at Chess, which is a satire on Spain. And it's literally the Spanish factions imagined as a chessboard. And this was a time when England was trying to improve its diplomatic ties with Spain. This play was considered offensive by some people who were invested in that. It was removed from the stage, and that removal made it popular. So it's A Game at Chess was actually, it had, I think, 7 consecutive performances, which is more than any play in the period. It appears a lot in manuscript and print. It's probably his most popular play of his lifetime. And he dies in 1627. So an odd career for Thomas Middleton. The next slide, please. So some elements of his career are a lot like Shakespeare's in terms of the genres they're working in, and to some degrees their upbringing. But some of his themes are themes that Shakespeare doesn't quite cover. He's very interested in economics. He's very interested in basic trades. Him being a Londoner rather than England and Stratford seems to be that might be the root of his interest. And a lot of his plays, especially those women's tragedies at the end, are interested in female protagonists, and especially how English society is dealing with women who are demanding both sexual and economic independence. And there's some biography to that. Middleton was his birth father died when he was young. His mother remarried to another man who spent all of their fortune until Middleton's mom kicked her out. So Middleton was very closely raised by his mother and his mother's nurse, actually, which led him to see pretty closely the ways that women were disadvantaged in the early modern economy. And a lot of his plays deal with that. One genre he writes in that Shakespeare never did was city comedy. And city comedies are actually set in the city of London, using known locations and actually types of characters who might be familiar from walking around the city and whatnot. And this is something Shakespeare never does, right? His plays set in England tend to be histories, nothing contemporary in the city, like city comedies. He tends to be openly satirical of the court in ways that Shakespeare isn't always. He's a very skilled practitioner of mise-en-scène. Women Beware Women famously has a scene where a woman is seduced by a powerful duke on the upper stage while the woman's guardian and the duke's assistant play chess on the game below. The moves on the chessboard modeling the seduction that's happening upstairs. A very cinematic way of staging that Middleton really innovated. And he's often kind of Calvinist. He sees kind of a divine, some people are just born bad and whatnot. And so a lot of ways he's different from Shakespeare. The image I have there is from, if you want to read a Middleton play, this is one I'd recommend, The Roaring Girl or Moll Cutpurse. And Moll Cutpurse is a typical Middletonian protagonist. She is a woman who occasionally dresses like a man, and her ability to navigate both genders gives her power in London. She can hang out with thieves. She can help aristocrats. And she's really a very interesting protagonist who, at the end of The Roaring Girl, she helps a couple of couples, a Romeo and Juliet type couple, get married. And it's set in the cities. It's set in actual shops. It's set in an actual kind of shopping mall in London. And it's a sort of a good example of the sort of thing that Middleton is interested in. A play set in London, very much invested in a lot of businesses in and around London. So Middleton is interested in economics in ways that Shakespeare isn't. And Timon of Athens is very much interested in that. So the next slide, please. So Timon of Athens is the favorite play of one of Shakespeare's most eager 19th century readers, Karl Marx, who used Timon who observed from Timon this quote, right? Shakespeare stresses especially two properties of money. It is the visible divinity, the transformation of all human and natural properties into their contraries, the universal confounding and distorting of things, that money can change things and make things into their contraries. Two, it is the common whore, the common procurer of people and nations. So this observation, we go to the next slide, please, is very much taken from a speech in this play later on, where Timon has been exiled. And I'll explain why in a second. We'll go over the plot. But Timon is living outside the city, and he's going to live off the land, and he's looking for roots to eat. And while he's digging for roots, he finds gold. And he realizes, what good is gold if I'm living in the forest? If I'm away from the city, this gold is just another rock. And this is what the speech very much is about. Yes, what is here? Gold, yellow, glittering, precious gold, probably said with some disdain and irony. No gods, I am no idle votarist. I've not given a vow to worship money. Roots, ye clear heaven. I was looking for roots. This much of this will make black white, foul fair, wrong right. Right? This is imagining gold, imagining money as making things their contraries. It can pay to make something black white, something that is bad good, something that is wrong right, base noble, old young, coward valiant. Right? Money makes things its contraries. Where Timon here is interested in truths. So, ha, ye gods, why is this, and what this, ye gods, why this will lug your priests and servants from your sides, right? Money will corrupt your priests and servants, pluck stout men's pillows from below their heads. It will make people uncomfortable. This yellow slave, and this is what that half line that's very characteristic of Shakespeare's late style, calling gold a yellow slave, will knit and break religions, bless the accursed, make the whore leprosy adored. And again, we're having a lot of contraries engendered here. Place thieves and give them title, knee, and appropriation. Money will make thieves respectable men with titles, with senators on the bench. This is it that makes the wappered widow wed again, right? When widows will remarry for gold. She whom the spittlebone and ulcerous sores would cast gorge at, this embalms and spices to the April May again. Someone who is unpleasant to look at. If they have gold, it will make them pleasant to look at. It's the way that gold is transformative. Come, damned earth, thou damned whore of mankind that puts odds amongst the rout of nations. I will make thee do right nation. So the earth or the gold is the common whore of mankind, to go back to that quote of March. It is the whore, the common procurer of people and nations. So money, what is it good for, says Timon here? All it does is lead to untruths, deceptions, commodification, prostitution. It's bad. But what are we supposed to do with that in this play? So go to the next slide, please. So really, basically, the plot of Timon. When we begin the play, before he's exiled, Timon is very well loved, right? The opening scenes are at a feast that he is giving. And he's generous. He likes to give money to people. He likes to feed people. Everyone loves him because of his generosity, because of his gift giving. With a notable exception, a philosopher named Apomantus, who is, even his name kind of suggests he is, off-putting and dour and serious, and he likes to hang around Timon, but seemingly just to make fun of him. Now, it turns out that Timon doesn't have any real wealth, that he's heavily leveraged. He's borrowing from other people to spend on people to become his friends. And this is where I should make very clearly that I had this presentation planned before any breaking news from the New York Times this weekend about certain world leaders who may be heavily leveraged and in a lot of debt. So please don't read this as a commentary on anything. That said, so Timon's servant Flavius realizes that Timon is in a great amount of debt, and these debts are being called in. So Timon thinks, well, I've been treating all of my friends very nicely all this time. They'll certainly help me now repay my debts. And they don't. They fail to help Timon out. So as a final gesture to his so-called friends, he organizes another feast, but it turns out he feeds them stones, which he then ends up throwing at them. And he decides to split from the city. The next slide, please. So he goes into exile. This is why he's digging for roots and finds gold. And after he finds gold, word gets out that Timon is in the forest and he's found a bunch of gold. So a number of people come and visit him and try to talk to him, including his steward Flavius, we'll talk about in a minute, and Apomantus, the dour philosopher. They have a debate that ends with Timon saying that Apomantus wouldn't be such a sour person if he had money. And that's something Apomantus doesn't really have a response to. And again, we are supposed to, in a longer presentation or a class on this, we'd go a lot into Apomantus, but there is the question of, you know, is he hanging around? Is he trying to maintain some personal integrity by mocking Timon's wealth while at the same time trying to benefit from it himself? It's Shakespeare, right? So there are no easy answers. At the end of the play, it's kind of Coriolanus-esque. There is a subplot about a general named Alcibiades who was defending another soldier of a crime. The judgment went against that soldier, and Alcibiades, angry, exiled himself from the city. He shows up with Timon with a couple of prostitutes and says, hey, I might invade Athens. And he decides that he will, so the people of Athens come to Timon and ask for money to defend themselves, which he refuses, and he just kind of dies. And he leaves behind a couple of epitaphs, which we'll talk about a little bit. And that's the play. So it's not exactly a tight plot. This is more a philosophical play, for lack of a better term. So the next slide, to put some historical context on this. What was money in Shakespeare's time? This is still a period. To call it capitalist is very anachronistic, right? Adam Smith is still like 150 years away from this. But you are starting to see some elements of a capitalist economy emerging. And Shakespeare does worry about the influence of this emergent capitalism on art. You see that a lot in the sonnets, for one place, where he also worries a bit about patronage. So London in Shakespeare's time is largely a credit economy. And that's because there are coins. And you'll often see, you know, money on stage will often be depicted as coinage. No paper bills yet. But coins are unreliable because there's no standard for them. And in fact, people would often shave gold off of coins to make new coins to kind of counterfeit them. This is something that Shakespeare's fellow playwright Christopher Marlowe was accused of doing. So coins were kind of untrustworthy. The more reliable source of income was actually IOUs, right? If I said I owed you 10 pounds, I might give you a slip that says I owe you 10 pounds. And that would be, you know, well, if you have to buy a sheep for 10 pounds, you can say, well, I have this 10-pound IOU from Dr. Connor. I'll give you that for the sheep, and your debt can, you know, go to him for your money, and that might work. So a lot of things are being done on credit, and credit itself is of relatively recent economic development here. It's ultimately not far from a gift economy. It's just exchanging goods and services for one another without requiring immediate compensation. So no central bank, no banking regulations. Now, with credit being a means of exchange, the debt economy that resulted allowed people to live beyond their means. And this is how you always hear, even going into the 19th century, about aristocrats that spent themselves wildly into debt. And this is, you know, what happens when you have an unregulated credit economy. On the other hand, the other side of this, the old medieval economy that was based around lords and vassals had pretty much broken down by now. And people could become wealthy independently through global trade for importing things like tobacco or feathers or clothes and whatnot like that. So there is, and this is something that especially Middleton's Roaring Girl is very into. There's a booming consumer economy in Middleton, both people making fortunes off of selling goods to people and people who want fine goods from overseas. And on top of that, King James himself, and this is a Jamesian play, 1605, spent tons of money on clothes, on performances, on things like that. He very nearly bankrupted England in the 17th century. There might be some suggestion that the play might be a mild satire on James himself. So these are kind of the anxieties that are circulating around the economy at the time Middleton and Shakespeare are writing Timon of Athens. Next slide, please. And maybe tied to this new economy, there's also an emerging sense that wealth and divine favor are kind of related. And this is an idea that pops up a lot in Timon of Athens. Early on, there's a merchant character, one of the people who Timon is invited to his feast, who is crediting his fortune and success as a merchant to God, right? If you're doing well, if you're making money via trade, God is showing his fortune upon you. Another character, a friend of Timon, Vitidius, ties his inheritance to God's fortune. Timon himself, one of the reasons he is initially not troubled about having to pay back his debts is because he believes his good fortune is the result of being a good person and being in favor with God, and God provided his bounty. This, of course, turns out not to be true. Lucius' servant, and this is the scene where Flavius the steward is going to the various houses and asking them to repay Timon some money that he gave them. Lucius' servant paying debts makes a clear way to the gods, right? If your balance sheet is correct and you're not showing debt, God will smile upon you. Versus, and Timon's servant, right? No, now all are fled, save only the gods. Now his friends are dead, right? There's no money coming in, and all that's left are the gods. So we see that last quote. We see this notion of God and wealth being connected, thought in another way. And then the next slide. Even with this idea, the play ultimately seems to, I won't say argue, we'll say argue against that for now. Because it focuses more time on the impact of Timon's, shall we say, bankruptcy. His steward, Flavius, he is the one who is balancing Timon's books, and he's the one who discovers the debt and discovers that Timon is in trouble. And Timon's response initially is to dismiss him and to accuse him of theft. So the one person showing some economic responsibility in this play actually gets treated badly initially. And the steward will again try to help collect some of Timon's debts, and he always gets doors slammed in his face. So Flavius, who is, at least in these opening scenes, portrayed as a figure of virtue, isn't seeing any of this economic fortune. So it undermines those connections between divine favor and wealth that seem to be taking place in other parts of the play. A senator who's hearing of Timon's misfortune, he worries, my reliances on his fracted dates have smit my credit, right? Because Timon is unable to pay back his loans and unable to get money from his friends to pay them. The senator's credit is also being hurt, and you're seeing this trickle down of economic misfortune. Lucius, similarly, there's comments that someone comments that his livelihood depends on Timon's generosity. So what's going to happen to Lucius's fortune? He, like the senator, will find himself now in financial peril. And then one scene right before the scene where Timon exiles himself, scene 13, is a scene where a lot of the stewards from these various houses are getting together. They've all lost their jobs. Flavius is, I think, trying to circulate some money to them. So because of Timon's bad economic policy, the economy of Athens seems to have collapsed. And people like the senator and Lucius, who are supposedly wealthy are revealed not to be, and a lot of stewards and people lower on the ladder are unemployed entirely. And ultimately, when Timon leaves, he distances himself from the economy. Athens has no way to fund the defense against itself. And at the end of the play, it's suggested that Athens will fall. So there's how this theme runs through this play. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of angles we can take on this, but the one I want to conclude by focusing on is one particular economic exchange that this play is very interested in. That's the relationship between art and money. Because in the first scene of the play, Timon is acting as a patron. He is giving artists money to create work in his name, to promote Timon's name, even to praise him. We'll see about this in a second. And we'll see what the play raises is the issue of what patronage buys. If an artist takes money from a nobleman to write for them, are they inevitably beholden to his influence? What kind of art can be made in an economy based around patronage? This nexus between art and commerce, what comes of it? Shakespeare, you might remember from a couple of weeks ago, he wrote Venus and Adonis. He dedicated it to Henry Rosalind and Lucrece as well. So he's not unfamiliar with patronage. The Lord Chamberlain's men and the King's men also depended on patronage. But since Shakespeare's theatrical company was largely financed by gate receipts, by people coming to the Globe and see them, rather than the largesse of patrons, he always maintained an economic independence that I think it's one of the reasons Shakespeare's remembered as such a great writer, is simply he brought in enough money that he was able to take time to write Hamlet and Coriolanus and things like that. Middleton's on the other side of that. He never became part of a company, so he was always dependent on the largesse of patrons or booksellers or these capitalist economic exchanges. And so part of what this play does is think about what happened since the theater and since writing in general has become this economic engine as well. So in the first act of the play, we see it opens with a poet and painter. They're watching a merchant and a jeweler. And so immediately the arts are associated with commercial merchants. They're almost in competition. Next slide, please. And we have the poet is going to talk about his craft. And he's sort of muttering to himself. He's thinking about this poem he's composing. And the first block here is that when we for recompense have praised the vile, when we for money have praised bad people, it stains the glory in that happy verse which aptly sings the good, right? So the verse that the poet is composing, and he's doing it in a way that people can hear him saying his verses. He's kind of showing off a bit here. It actually criticizes people for writing poems about people of low character. It's actually seems to be a critique of the patronage system, which the poet is actually trying to get himself into. So the merchant, he hears this poem and he likes it. It's good form. Jeweler and rich. The painter, you are wrapped, sir, in some work, some dedication to the great Lord, right? The poet's probably being dramatic in reading his verse, seeking attention, but he's competing with the painter and the merchant for Timon's attention. And the poet describes his poem as, a thing slipped idly from me. Our posy is as a gum which oozes from whence 'tis nourished. The fire in the flint shows not till it be struck. Our gentle flame provokes itself, and like the current, flies, each bounds its chase. So the poet is just saying, oh, I'm just, this poem just slipped idly from me. Poets need inspiration. They need a flint to make that fire. Our posy is just an unflavored sap that needs to be nourished. The poet's implication is, poetry is just kind of formless product until it is nourished, until something else turns it into poetry. And that here is Timon, right? I just happen to be composing a poem for Timon. So the poet is expressing that his poetry is so wrapped up in Timon's goodness. And I guess the question is this what poetry should be? Just odes to great people written so that a poet can fund their lifestyle. And so already we're seeing kind of poetry being trapped in this patronage system, and that system informing the content of poetry in a way that may not be great. Next slide, please. So this is more of that opening scene. They see Timon come in, and the poet describes it as this, you see this confluence, this great flood of visitors. I have in this rough work in his poem, shaped out of man, whom this beneath world doth embrace and hug with amplest entertainment. My free drift halts not particularly, but moves itself in a wide sea of wax. The short of this, and I won't go through this whole thing because I want to try to wrap this up. The poet's claim in this speech is that he's inspired by greatness and Timon just happens to be great, and that's why he's writing about Timon. So the poet is kind of trying to deny that he's writing his poem just to suck up to Timon, just to get money from him. It's just that Timon happens to be good, and I happen to be writing poems about them. He claims to be interested in a wide variety of topics, but somehow he always settles on Timon's goodness as a topic. So this is kind of the problem that's raised in this early part of the play. If poetry requires patronage, and that need to halt particularly, what becomes of poetry? What happens when poetry is entirely trapped in this proto-capitalist economic system, which the poet seems all too eager to participate in? And so, again, this is the problem Shakespeare and Middleton set up here. What happens to art when it has to compete in the marketplace? Next slide, please. So, jumping all the way to the end of the play, this is where after Timon's banquets, after his friends let him down and he leaves the city, one of the persons who visits him is his steward. And his steward, again, has been imagined as one of the honest people in this play. He tries to help Timon's debt problems. He tries to help his fellow servants. He hears Timon is in the woods, and he's actually going to go there, and he recognizes his misfortune and wants to help Timon. And Timon is moved by this. He admires his steward. The steward tries to give Timon gold. Timon seems moved by that, but in turn, he offers the steward gold, but with conditions, as he says, here take, and I left this in old spelling just to mix it up a little bit. Here take, the gods out of my misery has sent thee treasure. Go live rich and happy, but thus conditioned. Thou shalt build from men, hate all, curse all, show charity to none, but let the famished flesh slide from the bone ere thou relieve the beggar. In short, I want you to take this gold, but on the condition that you live miserably, that you don't help anyone with it, that you be as misanthropic as I am now. It's left unclear in the play whether or not the steward takes the gold, and this is one of those moments where we would debate the wider theme of money in this play. Is Timon sincere when he calls a steward honest, or does he know that the steward will take the gold under his conditions and he's just as corrupt as anyone else? So even in this play, the good character seems to be unable to entirely separate from some of the conditions that money brings to the table. So next chart, next quote, please. Next passage. So also visiting Timon in exile, the poet and painter comes back. This word gets out that Timon has gold. And so the poet and painter, of course, need to make their nickel, and they're going to find Timon, and they do. The poet, in fact, suggests that Timon isn't broke at all. He's just testing to see who his friends really are. So they find Timon. The poet flatters him. He claims he's rapt to write a poem about the ingratitude of Timon's friends. And Timon offers them a deal. He tells them, right, there's never a one of you that trusts a knave that mightily deceives you. And they, essentially, someone is tricking you. There's someone who is deceiving you, and they're wondering who he's talking about. Timon, and you hear him, you see him dissemble, you know his gross patry, love him and feed him, keep him in your bosom, let remain assured that he's a made-up villain, right? So someone you should mistrust. And they don't know who he's talking about. I don't know who this person is, my lord, says the painter, nor I, says Timon. Timon, look you, I love you well, I'll give you gold, rid me these villains from your companies, hang them or stab them or drown them in a draught, confound them by some course and come to me, I'll give you gold enough. Find these villains for me and get rid of them and stab them and I will pay you. And the poet and painter are into this. They agree. Next slide, please. There, name them, my lord. Let's know them. Yeah, who are they? Let's get them. Timon, and he's pointing at them through this dialogue. You that way, you this, but you two in company, each man apart, all single and alone, yet an arch villain keeps him company. So the poet and painter, he's saying, are always accompanied by a villain. That villain, each other. He's playing a bit of a trick on them. Both of you are accompanied by a villain, i.e. you are both villains. And so each of the other one is the villain that they are supposed to kill. Hence pack, he says, here's gold, you came for gold, ye slaves, and he's literally throwing gold at the poet and painter as they leave. You have worked for me, there's payment, hence you are an alchemist, make gold of that, out rascal dogs. So he's essentially tricked the poet and painter into agreeing to kill one another for money. The word I'd pick up on there is alchemist. You are an alchemist, make gold for that. This is what poetry's become, a kind of alchemy, a way of promising that you can turn base materials into gold that never quite happens, a charlatan. So rather than contrasting the poet's earlier description himself as gum, fire, or river, instead he's a shadowy pseudoscientist who tries to turn base materials into gold, tries to turn poetry into money. And it seems to be a critique of poets who write for money. Should poetry be a little more than just writing to please a patron? So the next slide, please. So the easy question, and one that's really unanswered by this play, is, so what do these playwrights offer as an alternative? And they really don't offer anything convincing. This is Shakespeare. We're left with unanswers. Timon does write a couple of epitaphs, a couple of poems before he dies, and it is uncommodified writing, right? Because Timon's not writing to be paid here. He's just writing poetry. And these are the two epitaphs he writes. And the first is, Timon is dead, who outstretched his span. Some beast read this, there does not live a man. And it's actually a joke. It says Timon is dead here. Whoever reads this, some beast read this, you're not a man, you're a beast. So it's kind of whoever reads this poem is a beast. And if you've just read the poem, so you are a beast. So haha, Timon has called me a beast, right? Not exactly the high art, one might expect from poetry either. And the next one is just confusing. Here lies a wretched corpse, or wretched soul bereft. Seek not my name, a plague consume you, wicked caitiffs left. Here lies a corse, don't worry about who I am, I curse you. Here lie I, Timon, who alive all living men did hate. Pass by and curse thy fill, but pass and stay not here my gate. So at once this epitaph says, don't seek who I am, but in the next line it tells you, I am Timon. It's a curse in the first part. The second one, he's encouraging the reader to curse the poem. So it's not clear how Timon wants to be remembered or what he's trying to do with these epitaphs. These epitaphs are often a reason people think Timon of Athens is incomplete, that Shakespeare and Middleton haven't decided on what Timon wants to say at the end. But I wonder if what does come through this writing is Timon's misanthropy, his hatred, his disdain for people. But if this is an example of uncommodified writing, it's really not all that better than what the poem has to offer. So by the end of the play, we have Middleton and Shakespeare maybe offering critiques of patronage, of this intersection between art and money, but also failing to really imagine a proper way out of this. So perhaps this play is designed to serve as a warning for writers who are entering this system to maybe not get too close to your patrons, or maybe keep an eye on who you're actually writing for. Next slide, please. And this is pretty much the last one. Just again, to summarize it with a good tickle brain, Timon is generous, he loses all his money, he becomes a misanthropist, finds more money, writes his epitaph and dies. Pretty simple. But the big questions, right? Can art survive independent of economics? And I think a big reason for this play is to show you this is where we are now, and is this how we want this system of art to function? Not so much a critique, but a warning. Can patronized art be authentic? Timon's lyrics are certainly authentic, but they're also confusing and kind of mean. The poet at least has grand designs for his poems, even if he's writing them simply to honor Timon. It's a complicated question that the play raises and pointedly doesn't answer. And finally, is Timon, what are we supposed to think of Timon? Is he heroic for leaving the city and telling all his friends, you weren't there for me, goodbye, I hope Alcibiades and his army take you over? Is he cowardly for not trying to make things better in Athens, for walking away rather than trying to face his problems? Or is he just insane, a person broken by trying and failing to participate in this economic system where he tries to use money to favor people? So, very different from Timon of Athens, from As You Like It, right? The trip to the forest doesn't change Timon, it seems to make him worse, and it ends badly. It goes to show you the many ways that Shakespeare works. And that ends my little talk and my presentations here. Next slide is kind of my farewell. Thank you very much for letting me chat online with you guys. I would love to do this again in person. Hopefully this COVID thing ends really soon. Until then, I feel free to send me an email. Again, I will try to respond to it pretty soon. And if people have questions, the microphone is set up. Fire away.
I have a question about As You Like It. In Act 4, Rosalind was so patronizing to Phoebe, and she said she was a handmaid and she had leather hands, and I just wondered if what Shakespeare thought about class superiority was he for it or against it?
That's a good question, because the thing to keep in mind with As You Like It and with other plays in the forest is that Shakespeare's a country boy too. He grew up in Stratford, which is very much not London. So I think there's part of him that sees a little bit of himself in these people in the country. I would think, I think this is one of the problems with a strict pastoral reading of As You Like It, that Rosalind does seem to maintain a little bit of contempt for the people of the country. You're right. I mean, Phoebe, if there were a defense, it might be that she's trying to not get Phoebe interested in marrying her because, she's really Ganymede and a man and just trying to insult her to get away from it. But quite often when I read her scenes or when students discuss them, she still kind of sounds like a city person in the country. And even though she gets her happy ending and whatnot, I think it's one of those suggestions in the play that while she may have improved as a person and that she takes control of her own destiny, that there is still a little bit of wariness about country life in there. So long story short is, while Shakespeare often uses his country characters as figures of comedy, I think we're supposed to see them kind of sympathetic and clever. And I think we might look at exchanges like the ones you described as maybe something Shakespeare would be a bit disdainful of, if that answers your question. I'm sorry, that was slightly rambly. If that's all, again, I'll catch up with your emails, I promise. Feel free to send me some, keep in touch afterwards. Love to do this again in person. Stay healthy, be well. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.